You know, the introductions were so robust. I'm afraid that I've built pretty much my entire business life and political life on diminished expectations. So I do want to thank Peter for the introduction and Peter and Rob for all the support. I'll talk a little bit about coin in a little bit. And Kelly Kwan, who I bow down to, a great, super example of Kenyan leadership. I want to start by talking a little about a story in 1886. There were, back then, only 38 states. The gross national product was only $10 million. There were 58 million people in the entire country, of whom 2/3 of them lived in rural areas. And there was a jeweler in Minnesota who received an order of watches. And they'd been dumped off and were unsellable. But he recognized that there was recently they had just created 4 time zones all across the country. And so he sent a telegram to other train station agents, which is what he also did, advertising the watches. And he sold them quickly at a tidy profit, and then used this new network of trains to get the watches to their destinations. So, and then the obvious punchline is, does the name Richard Sears ring a bell? You know, I mean, they're based in Chicago. Come on, you guys. So anyway, he started by selling watches. In the end, he was selling furniture and cars and entire houses. And the real question, I think, was, you know, innovation is such a kind of a catch-all these days, but that wasn't why Sears was so successful, right? Clearly, he needed to utilize innovation and find solutions to fresh problems as he built up this incredible distribution network. And I think the real challenge, and I think what he signs up is that he was, in the strongest sense of the word, taking innovation and as an entrepreneur, using that to fill a void, a demand for all these things. And I think there's a lot of people now looking at, how do you balance innovation versus entrepreneurship? Jim Clifton, who is the chairman and CEO of Gallup, has a book out now called The Coming Jobs War, where he actually goes so far as to say there's an oversupply of innovation, and that really what we have a lack of is entrepreneurship, and that, you know, entrepreneurship and execution become the critical factors. Richard Sears created a business model around the new forces that were shaping the country, right? Largely rural populations, the train, the telegram, the Midwest becoming the heart of the manufacturing, of the industrial heart of the country. And I think that model of a void being filled by an entrepreneur who, again, utilizes innovation, but is entrepreneurial, continues to this day. You know, the modern day, some people compare Amazon and Jeff Bezos to what Richard Sears did. You know, Amazon started out selling books. Now they sell DVDs, CDs, MP3s. You put any 3 letters together you want, and somehow Bezos is selling them. Now they're still not selling cars or complete houses, but that's probably a matter of time. I think you look at how rapidly these companies can grow, and you know, Amazon now has 65,000 employees. It's got a market cap right around $100 billion. The acceleration of how fast this happens doesn't diminish the commonality that ultimately businesses have to have customers. Innovation without a need or a vacuum can sit, you know, the most incredible patents can sit on a shelf for years without someone to take that idea and translate it into a product or a service that actually creates or fulfills that vacuum for customers. I think that the entrepreneurship, personally, the entrepreneurship is the more important of those balancing factors, and it is really the kind of the horse that pulls the cart that is innovation. I started out as a geologist when I came out to Colorado in 1981. You know, I thought I was a pretty good geologist. Turned out maybe not quite so good. The price of oil collapsed. Company got sold. The whole company got laid off. And you know, we got a good severance package, so I was pretty happy for a couple of months. Started looking for work. Didn't really come together the way I thought it was going to come together. And I saw a brew pub, a restaurant that brewed its own beer out on the West Coast, and actually in Berkeley, where I was helping my brother fix his roof. And I sensed, and I was a geologist, right? I didn't know what a pro forma was. And I sensed that this was something that, we stood in line on a Wednesday night to get in. The beer had more flavor. It wasn't so carbonated. And I said, God, I'd drive 20 minutes out of my way to get a beer like this. And so came back, and even as I looked for jobs in geology, I had this nagging sense that there was this vacuum, that this was an idea, a product that would find resonance. People in Colorado would really expand to it. And so I went to the library literally and got out a book on how to write a business plan and figure out what a pro forma was. I had friends that owned a restaurant, and they very generously allowed me to come in and look at their books and sit down with their accountant for a whole day. We spent about 8.5 hours of figuring out what they spent to buy stuff, how much it cost to kind of transform that stuff into food and to beer, and really allowed us to create a business plan that created the impression we knew what we were doing, which we really didn't. But I think, just like any entrepreneur, we were trying to focus on who are those customers, and how do you solve all the different problems between delivering on that vacuum, that need, and also being able to make money at it. One of the things we opened in part of Denver is called Lodo, lower downtown. It's actually where Peter has his office. And back then, our rent was $1 a square foot per year, right? It was a wasteland. It's beautiful. It's about 25 blocks of turn-of-the-century warehouses. At that time, the vast majority were abandoned. We were the first restaurant to open in downtown Denver. We finally got open in 1988. It took 2 years to raise the money. I couldn't get my own mother to invest. She kept saying, who wants to eat dinner in a brewery? I said, no, Mom, it's like a bakery. It's fresh. It's better. Beer is food. Obviously, I had to develop my pitch a little bit better. So when we finally got open, though, the one innovation, and I'd never worked in a restaurant, so we got a manager who had some experience, and we got a pretty great staff together, and they were all excited about Colorado's first brew pub. And I started going around once we got open, and we got some good press, and we started off with a good note. But I could just see that there was so little going on downtown, and no real sense of place. So I started going to the other restaurant owners, and I would put up ads in our restrooms or in our lobby as people came in, advertising these other restaurants that were in lower downtown. At that time, there were only about 6. And my staff came to me and said, "Are you out of your mind? This is dog eat dog. You can't advertise the competition." And I said, well, maybe the real competition, maybe they're not the real competition. And our real competition is the TV set. Right? And our job is to get people off the couch and out the door to enjoy life with their family and friends. So pretty soon we did joint advertising in the newspapers. We got 5 or 6 of the restaurants all together. We had a lower downtown Brewers Festival, Lodo Brewers Fest, where everyone chipped in some food. We got other of the craft, newly emerging microbreweries to come support it. We started trying to create a sense of place. We were buying, 4 of us got together and started buying pint glasses together, just doing collaborative purchasing. And I think that was a sense of how you can transform by just being distinctly collaborative, how you can transform some of the traditional business imperatives or yardsticks and look at them in a way that is disruptive in a very real way. And within 2.5 years of opening, there were several other restaurants. Some of the guys around Metro Denver that did know how to run restaurants were looking and saying, that jerk Hickenlooper is making money. Can you believe that? We got to be downtown. And suddenly we had all these folks, literally coming out of the woodwork, and we had to, each time, as with almost any business, we had to try and figure out ways to reinvent ourselves to keep fresh. We did a pool hall on the 2nd floor. We did a large banquet hall. We didn't want to be in the business of measuring which nonprofit was better, but we wanted to really engage with the community and really ingrain ourselves. So we decided the one thing we could do to any nonprofit was to give them a keg of beer. Because, and I don't want to blow it for other brew pubs in town, but when you make the beer yourself, it's cheap. Really, really cheap. So back then it was about 16 or 18 bucks to make a keg of beer, and they could sell a glass for $1 or $2 and make anywhere from $500 to $1,000 for their charity. So all these things were ways that we tried to create a distinction between, what we were doing and what the other restaurants were doing. And as often the case, we were spending a great deal of time making stupid mistakes. Obviously, I think you always got to be willing to take the chance, and you've got to, if you're not taking risks, you don't recognize the opportunities. But failure is often where you learn the most. There's a great quote here that by Machiavelli. Now, I'm not trying to elevate Machiavelli back up to. I realize he's got a bad brand right now. He said, entrepreneurs are simply those who understand that there is little difference between obstacle and opportunity and are able to turn both to their advantage. And I think that's a lot of what we were trying to do, is take those obstacles and at the same time opportunities and leverage them. After we built the pool, and I should be bluntly honest also, you do have to work hard and you have to leverage opportunity and deal with obstacles, but it's also, as my grandfather told us when we were kids, it's better to be lucky than to be good. So even though we opened in '88, we struggled for a couple of years, we got all these restaurants together. In 1995, the city of Denver recognized that lower downtown was a unique place. By this time there were probably 50 restaurants down there. And so that's where they sited Coors Field when Denver finally got a professional baseball team. So they ended up putting it 2 blocks from my front door. And I was able to prove without question that it is better to be lucky than to be good. And so after that happened, we opened brew pubs around the country. We did them in downtowns, always in historic buildings, always in a downtown area, always trying to create community around it, to use that sense of kind of that collaborative effort. And we're sitting around, and I got goaded into running for mayor. I'd never run for any office in my life, student council or anything. As a matter of fact, I never even hung out with those people that did run for office. Well, come on, they were all off. I'm going to step on a couple toes here, but they were a little bit creepy sometimes, right? And I wanted to, all my customers, every elected official was a bum, was a jerk. And I really wanted to, bring a small business mentality to government and demonstrate to people that government could work. And this notion, we are the great experiment in government in the United States, and part of that is predicated upon successful people from business taking time out of their lives and giving 5 or 10 or 15 years to public service, and taking all the experiences around risk and reward and obstacles and opportunity and translating that into public service. And so I ran on this notion of collaboration, that just as the restaurants had worked together, we should try and get towns to work together. We had, that time, Denver had about 34 suburban municipalities around it. And I kept saying, and everyone hated downtown Denver. We had all the skyscrapers, a much stronger tax base, but they'd hem Denver in, so Denver couldn't expand anymore. So now more of the wealthy, even businesses, there was what they called the Denver Technology Center down in southeast Denver. A lot of the large corporations moved out of downtown, down to the suburbs. Almost all the wealthy people were moving out into the suburbs. And there was a vicious animosity. The largest suburb, Aurora, their mayor and the mayor of Denver, who preceded me, could not be in the same room without attacking each other. And in the press, TV, newspapers, they were relentlessly at each other's throat. And I campaigned against that and talked directly about how much more we could do if we worked together, and had, I got elected by, and this was, my wife, basically she was promised that someone like me could never win. And we did a couple funny ads and got endorsed by one of the big newspapers in town, and we won going away. We won by 2 to 1. My wife still hasn't forgiven me. The first time the poll came, I started out, I was like at 6 or 8% in the polls, and suddenly a poll came out after the endorsement and doing this funny ad where I rode around on a scooter. I was buying a suit to look more mayoral, it turned out from a used clothing place, like a Salvation Army type place. And the poll came out about a week later. My wife was reading this poll in the newspaper, and I jumped from 6%, and suddenly I was now at 31%. Everyone else was at 15%. And she's reading this paper, and she's a journalist, so she used to write for the New Yorker. And she lowers the newspaper so her eyes are looking over the paper at me, and she says, "You never told me you were going to win." But we threw a reception the Saturday before I got inaugurated. I got inaugurated on Tuesday. We threw a reception for all the county commissioners from our surrounding counties and all the mayors of the 34 communities around Denver and their spouses down. And at that time I was living in a loft, the last real estate project I developed, and had a big view of the skyline. You're right downtown. Most of these people had never been invited to a political or a politically related event in Denver in their lives. And we had about 140 people in our big living room, kind of a big open front room. And, I gave a 90-second speech that the days of Denver making decisions for its own benefit were over, and that from now on, if we couldn't find a decision that benefited everyone, we'd work on something else. And there was a long pause, and then huge applause, and stamping and shouting, and there was such, you talk about a vacuum and an opportunity for an entrepreneurial product or service. This was a classic one that they were just waiting to be invited to create a collaboration. And we started working right away on Denver had no mass transit to speak of, right? Crummy bus system, and we had a trial light rail system. And what we call RTD, the Regional Transportation District, had been working on had a plan around building 119 miles of new track, which is at the time the most ambitious transit initiative in the country. Well, we set out, immediately went to work, and in the end we got all 34 mayors unanimously to support fast tracks, right? So little teeny towns, big cities like Aurora and Denver, and a lot of it was going out and really listening. Every time there was someone who didn't like it, was upset, you go right to the problem. It's part of that's one of the core things you learn in the restaurant business, and I say this all the time. Every elected official should run a big high-volume restaurant, for a couple of years. Especially executive, mayors and governors and people, because you learn, and I always make a joke, well, running a big city, running a restaurant, there are two things that are always the same, or three things. You never have enough capital, you have a diverse group of people, you've got to make it into a great team, and the public's always pissed off about something, right? And that's the joke. But the real truth is, you learn in the restaurant business, or any good small business, that there's no margin in having enemies. You'll do whatever it takes to make that no matter how cranky that customer, you'll do whatever it takes to make them recognize that you care about the relationship and you're going to go forward working together. And we did that with these mayors, and even in the end, we were able to demonstrate that even those suburbs that weren't going to get a light rail line, we did engineering studies, traffic surveys of showing that their citizens would still save, I think it worked out to about 22 minutes a day on average in commuting time by the people that got onto light rails, onto the mass transit, were essentially getting out of their way and decreasing commuting times for everybody. So in essence, people who were paying, it worked out that they were going to pay about 28 cents a day in additional sales tax and save about 24 minutes a day in time. And without people voted for it, we passed that initiative, which was it was 0.4 of a cent sales tax increase, and we passed it 60-40. And again, getting 34 out of 34 mayors to work on that was, a remarkable achievement. We used sort of the same public-private, and when we did fast tracks, it was the Regional Transportation District that we got all the businesses from the different regions to support it with, not just with money, but with really reaching out to their employees. It was a strong public-private partnership that really succeeded, partly because everyone was involved in the planning and had a sense of ownership. We also took on homeless, and I don't know where my Chief of Staff, Roxanne White, is here somewhere, who came over and became our head of human services. It's always good to get someone who grows up on a little ranch in the middle of Montana, but who's been a social worker, but also has a graduate degree in divinity. Now, if you're going to have, because it gets you past all kinds of obstacles. It turns those, And she helped put together a process by which we reached out. We had a 50-person commission that was going to look at homelessness and really measure it for once. Instead of just talking about it, really measure how many homeless people are there, how much are we spending. Over the course of about 20 months, this commission had, they met monthly for 2 to 3 hours, and they had over 300 people came to at least 2 consecutive meetings. In other words, either to listen, to provide information, to be part of this process, so that when we came out with a 10-year plan to end homelessness, and Denver was one of the first cities to do this, we really understood a lot of the details. Like chronic homelessness was on the average costing, almost $40,000 per person per year to perpetuate these lives of misery, because they'd go to the hospital and they already had, they had acute medical problems like, diabetes, whatever. They'd show up and their arm would be already blue. And since they were homeless, we had to keep them in the emergency room, in the hospital for weeks, sometimes months. The average visit for chronically homeless people was almost $28,000 with hospitals. So again, went out to all the businesses and the affected, the interested parties, so downtown hotels, businesses that had a real relationship to the brand of what was the city of Denver. So professional sports teams, the Broncos and Nuggets, the Avalanche, the Rockies, they all chipped in $1 million towards our campaign to end homelessness and allowed us to really dramatically reduce that process. We had, within the first 5 years, we'd cut chronic homelessness by over 60%. And really, just by going to the homeless, making sure that they got medications for their mental illness if they had them, or if they had addictions, we got them counseling. Most importantly, we got them job training, got them into jobs. And I think those public-private partnerships are crucial. I grew up 5 blocks from a thing called Lancaster Pike outside Philadelphia. That originally was founded in 1793. It was the first long-distance public-private partnership. Was the Lancaster Turnpike. Back then, long distance, 63 miles. Now we fly from Denver to Dubai in half a day, but 200 years ago in Pennsylvania, that was a big deal. And it was a turnpike company that was a partner with the government, and they did it. They were allowed to charge certain fees, were given the right of way, similar to what you would even see today. But I thought the cost they charged was great. The Lancaster Turnpike charged a toll to defray their costs. And it was $0.25 for every score of cattle and $0.125 for every score of hogs or sheep, clearly of less value. And I think that, what happened along the Lancaster Pike was that the ownership of the turnpike itself ended up creating benefit, receiving benefit because they owned the land along those lines, and suddenly they started seeing taverns and inns crop up where weary travelers could slake their thirst, often with beer, I admit. And that, that whether it was the Lancaster Turnpike or the Erie Canal in 1825 or the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869, all these were examples of where there was a clear collaboration. And I thought it was useful to, when you go back and look at all those collaborations, there were certain things that in every case they had. That in private partnerships, you always want to make sure of creating that shared vision between the public and private, that everybody has a say in where you're going. You make sure that you have to balance risk and reward, and making sure that people's rewards are going to be appropriate to the level of risk they're going to take, that there is a real sense there. There has to be transparency, especially this is whenever you have a political entity. Even back then, there was a great mistrust, probably more so today. And I think that there needs to be a sense of a timeline and accountability along with that timeline, and therefore a real sense of urgency when you're trying to do these things. We had a number of projects like that where a lot of their success was getting people out there. We did one congregation, one family was something we did with homelessness that allowed us to get. There were 1,100 rough justice congregations in Metro Denver, roughly 1,400 homeless families, not chronically homeless, but homeless families. And we got the congregations to take responsibility for a family, first month's rent, deposit, and then provide 4, 5, or 6 mentors to help that family make sure they got into housing and stayed in housing. They got a job, they stayed with the job. Hugely successful. We've now had over 350 congregations work on this, have lifted over 1,000 homeless families back into housing. Right now we're trying to, again, just like entrepreneurs, trying to find hidden value in some of these things. A lot of the savings around chronically homeless was in Medicare or Medicaid, and we couldn't harvest those savings because they accrued to the federal government. And now we're talking right now with the Health and Human Services, and a couple states are really negotiating, saying, all right, if we can take Medicaid patients that are costing roughly, I think the estimate was almost $24,000 a year, and we think by getting them into housing with just minimal support services, we could save $16,000 a year. Can we take half of that savings and put it towards making sure we deliver those services? And I think the initial opportunity or the initial response is that I think the federal government is willing to look at things like that now. I also wanted to just take a second before I finish on COIN, just because we did, when I first got elected, we did a bottom-up economic development plan. We reached out and went all over the state and looked at, in all 64 counties, what is the local people's vision of what they want for economy? What do they see their economy looking like? And it was amazing. We had roughly 6 things that came through universally that we saw in every corner of the state. Obviously, everybody felt that we had to be pro-business, and you heard it here first, but you watch in the next couple of years, Colorado will be, we're going to work very hard to make it recognized as the most pro-business state in the country. But also, to be pro-business, what does that mean? All right? Obviously, you want to attract businesses and entrepreneurs, but you also want to retain and expand the businesses that are there. You want to make sure you have additional access to capital, that you educate and train the appropriate workforce for the jobs that are going to be there tomorrow, that you create a brand for the state that is stronger and pro-business, and that you cultivate innovation and technology. Those were the 6 things that came back, and that innovation technology is what drew us to trying to figure out what we could do for innovation. And that's when we met Peter Bryant, who kind of opened the doors, and Rob Wolcott, and we heard this notion of having a kin global. And we were, kind of swept away by it. And in Colorado, we have 24 federal labs, and we thought, well, what would happen if we took this notion, this kind of crucible of innovation, and did it on not just with one school, but with all the schools in Colorado. It's good to be the governor. You have control over all those public schools, but also, the 24 federal laboratories, all of our businesses, try to bring in all the nonprofits, and, have a couple-day conference, but also really focus on, what a portal might look like, and how do you begin solving and getting some of the obstacles that government creates out of the way of business, and at the same time accelerating that ability to find entrepreneurs, to take and raise up and provide the resources for entrepreneurs so that you can take the ideas and more rapidly turn them into jobs. So we're going to do this on August 29th and 30th. Certainly invited. We're going to have Muhtar Kent, the CEO of Coca-Cola, is going to come and be one of our inaugural speakers. I think Safra Katz she's the president of Oracle, and she hasn't quite confirmed yet, but we know that she's on the edge of her seat, waiting to make sure that that works out. And it is a wonderful thing, because I think it's we call it the Colorado Innovation Network. So Colorado CO and then Innovation Network, so it's COIN. And it does owe, I think it will be different than kin, but in many ways an appropriate child to have kind of sprung out. I want to finish just real quickly to talk a little bit about, ultimately the challenges that we all face in our lives, and then we can answer some questions that right now we are probably at the most divisive point in this country, certainly since the Vietnam War, and perhaps maybe going back almost to the Civil War. And yet I think there is a way, by using some of those techniques from the restaurant business, right? When someone's really pissed off, you go to them and you repeat back saying what they said to you. And that's, that sense of calming people down, and no matter what happens, recognizing that you want to work together. And Colorado's 1/3 Republican, 1/3 Democrat, 1/3 independent. We're truly a purple state, and yet we passed our budget a year ago with, you know, out of 100 General Assembly votes, we passed it with 80. This year we passed it with 86 votes, and this is when, you know, a number of other states, you know, Minnesota's state government came to a standstill. Wisconsin was in the courts. I think right now Illinois still hasn't gotten their state budget done, and I think this did they get it done last night? I heard they were close, but this. We don't have the luxury that we used to have, right? Right now, the U.S. is really being challenged by India and Japan, and we've seen this before. You know, back in when I was a kid in the 1970s, they were saying how Germany and Japan were going to destroy us. There were predictions 30 years ago that Germany and Japan would overwhelm our economy in the next 30 years. And yet, obviously, that didn't happen. And it really was a prediction. They predicted 30 years ago that the U.S. economy would be at about $3.8 trillion. And of course, now it's turned out to be roughly $15 trillion. And really what it was a level of innovation and collaboration in this country where I think the freedom to pursue and build whatever you want is everywhere, allowed us to outstrip all those predictions. Well, that can only happen if people are willing to work together, and it can only happen if there is a real focus on those outcomes. And right now we don't see it. I think a big part of this is not getting enough people from business into government. And I know what you see on the media often isn't very attractive, but it's a blast, I can tell you that. And that there's a guy named Jeff Smart, and there's a book that's going to come out, I think tomorrow, called Leadocracy. And he wrote a book called Who, which is, I think, the best book I've ever read on how to go about hiring people. And it was a bestseller on the New York Times list for years. And he helped us hire a bunch of our cabinet. And he was kind of taken by the fact that we weren't playing politics. We were hiring Republicans and Democrats, the best people we could find. And he said, well, how come you don't have better applications? I said, well, so many people don't want to get into government. And so he sat down with Roxanne White and Ken Lund and other folks and really focused on how could we get more people into government? And I think that's the key that all of you can play a role in. I think if we are able to get past some of this divisiveness and really focus on outcomes and appropriate collaborations, that we don't have to be handcuffed by these predictions of, you know, I think right now they're saying China's going to pass us. We're growing at 2%. China's growing at 8 to 10%. They're going to pass us in 20 years, the last prediction I saw. I don't think that's going to happen because I think we're going to figure this out. So anyway, thank you for your attention. Let's answer some questions. Please.